It is my pleasure to welcome you to this armchair conversation with Robert Frederick Smith. He is an innovator and very successful, a remarkable leader, pioneer, inventor, and investor. People say that there are few that understand how to unlock innovation and entrepreneurship like he does. So we're going to get a wealth of information from him today about these key issues that are related to wealth. He is a true visionary, and he blends his talent and drive with humility and generosity. So, I mean, the first kind of thing that, welcome,
Thank you.
Mr. Smith.
Happy to be here. Excited to be here. Thanks.
So for those of us, I mean, Vista Equity Partners, you've never lost money on any investment, apparently since 2000 when you started the firm.
Yeah, any buyout deal. We had two venture deals early on, which are about $38 million out of now $14 billion worth of deals. But it's the typical story. Don't listen to what other people say, but we'll talk about that later.
So, but no, talk about that now, because sure. Many of us aren't familiar with this world of, sure. Enterprise development, equity. Tell us what you do and,
sure.
and how you do it.
Yeah, the short answer is I am in the buyout business, and what we do is identify, in our case, it's enterprise software companies, and take them private, or if they are a private company, we buy all of the equity and then bring to bear a transformation in those businesses. We help them operate more efficiently, more effectively, typically expanding the size of their organizations, i.e. create more jobs, the opportunity set, more products they can sell to their customers, improve their revenue growth, improve their profit margins, and then sell it at a higher number at the end, and then return that capital back to our limited partners, and of course we take some portion of it for ourselves.
And why did you choose enterprise software?
It's interesting. Enterprise software, and the way to really think about it, it is the most productive tool that's been introduced in our business economy over the last 50 years. I want you to actually think about, for some of us here, what life was like 35 years ago in the business community. Mm-hmm. When you did anything from check in and out of a hotel, or bought an airline ticket, or how you kept the power grid stable, or actually, how did you manage an insurance portfolio, or even sign up an insurance policy. Today, we do that all electronically, if you think about it, right? It has created a massive productivity element throughout almost every single industry on the planet, and especially in developed economies. And the thing about it, which is what's neat about enterprise software, is it's an intellectual property-based business. And if you think about this conference, wealth inequality, et cetera, many businesses that you'd like to go in to make money, you need a lot of capital, mm-hmm. right? Real estate, for instance, there was a big deal that was done. Folks know GE Capital has decided to get out of that business, right? And the ramifications of that are huge, and people won't realize that for a few years, but one of the early things they did was they just sold a $23 billion portfolio of real estate assets to Blackstone. Well, if you don't have that kind of capital base, you can't go into that business, period. Whereas if you're in the world of software, all you need is intellectual property and access to computing power, which now we have with this thing called the internet. You have access via your phone to more computing power than they had by a multiple to put a man on the moon mm-hmm. 35, 40 years ago, right? So the thing about enterprise software, it actually liberates. And it has the potential to liberate individuals, and of course that liberation of individual mindsets can create tremendous economic wealth for individuals. And that's why you see this massive economic wealth expansion in places like California, where there is a systemic structuring for the development of these sort of entrepreneurial ideas, leveraging software, leveraging technology to create new products and services sold throughout industry. So the reason I moved into this business is because it has this high productivity component to it. It doesn't require, in some respects, a lot of capital, but it requires intellectual capital mm-hmm. To actually create products and services and solutions, and then create wealth and value. And so in terms of barriers to entry, it has, in some respects, a very high one in terms of knowledge, mm-hmm. Know-how, intellectual property, but a low one in terms of capital. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the reasons why I selected that industry as the first to go in.
So, I mean, I think people are going to be curious about how you even got exposure to this kind of industry. And you're 52 years old.
Well, okay.
Tell us your story. You had two parents who were PhDs in education.
I'm still just bruised over here. Okay.
It's on your bio, so I figured you weren't,
but
you
only
weren't
you
shy
had
about
that.
that. No, okay. Your parents were PhDs in education. Where were they from?
My mother's actually from here, Washington, D.C. And my grandfather worked in this building actually back when FDR was inaugurated. And, funny story about that. I brought him when President Obama was inaugurated. And my grandfather, who was at that time 92, walked. Remember how cold it was that entire day for about 2.5 hours there and 2.5 hours back, and didn't complain the whole day. And a good friend of ours, Senator Ted Kennedy, gave us the tickets. So I'm sitting, and he's pointing, oh, look at that, and he, as we sat down, he said, grandson, you see that window up there with the flag under it? I said, yeah. He said, I was in that lounge when FDR was inaugurated. And I looked down, because, he served coffee and tea and took coats and hats, and he said, I looked down, and I remember there was not a black face in the audience. And here I am, sitting here with my grandson watching the first African-American being inaugurated as President of the United States. He said, it's a great country, and it's full of opportunity. You just have to go out and seize it. So, to your point, both of my parents, one was from here, one was from Colorado. My dad, I'm the fourth generation from Colorado.
Wow.
We moved back there, got, part forcibly marched and part kind of, made our way into the southern part of California, or Colorado, back in the 1860s. And that's where I'm from. Now, both of these parents, PhDs in education, and I chuckle because I just got my first honorary doctorate. I'm receiving another one in a couple of weeks.
Congratulations.
And I tease my mother and say, I don't know who had the harder road to get there. Because as you know, PhDs are very hard, but the road of life is quite difficult. But I just remember growing up in, call it recently desegregated schools in Denver, and you grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood. There was a Japanese family that lived around the corner, and I know why they lived there. If you think about, how they were, Japanese Americans were treated during the war, et cetera. But we had our own grocery stores and own doctors, and I lived next to the lieutenant governor of the state who was black, state senator who was a representative who was black. But I looked at how we lived, and I said, everyone tells me education is the key, and it wasn't bad, but I could tell the kids who I went to school with lived a whole lot differently than we did, and none of their parents had PhDs, right? So I said, there's a gap here, and I wanted to understand what that was. So that's what led me to actually think about, what is it? It isn't just education. That's a part of it. There's no question. But it's access to opportunity, access to mentorship, access to know-how. And it gets back into that intellectual property piece. It's knowledge. I tell people in America, we have really 6 exports, all of them are intellectual property based at the end of the day. It's knowledge and insights and information that if you don't have that, no matter, in some respects, how much capital, how much desire you have, it's going to be hard for you to move along the wealth chain and expand the opportunity set for yourself and your family.
How did you internalize the residential segregation piece of that? The fact that everybody who was African American was situated in the same neighborhood.
Yeah. When you were a kid, you don't notice it, right? You get out and you play with kids, and you get on a bus for an hour to go to a school. And I went there at first grade, so I was one of the first kids to. So that's all I knew. And now I'm in one of only 2 African Americans typically in my classroom, and those kids play just like us, act just like they ate different food than us, in some respects. But you didn't start to notice it until years later when you started getting invited to parties, right? And back when I was growing up, a birthday party was you get to invite one friend because you got 22 cousins, and it was a cake your mom made, and that was it, right? Well, you go to these parties, and there's a whole different deal, and then you started to really understand that they had a different level of wealth. But then when you talk to their parents weren't any more educated, okay, and didn't work anywhere as near as hard as mine. And I said, well, something's just amiss. And I couldn't quite reconcile that until much later in life when you start realizing about access to opportunity.
Right.
Yeah.
So, residential segregation, busing, affirmative action. Where did you go to school?
I went to Cornell.
Okay.
And, I went to Denver East High School, which is the same high school my father went to. And it's interesting, so, 2 of my kids, one's going to boarding school now, one's going next year. And I wanted to go to my brother got into Exeter, and he just decided not to go, and then my parents said, well, then nobody's going, right? And so I went to the same high school my dad went to. And then I started looking at schools. And it's typical back then, you know, you go to the college placement, this access information, and you know, the placement counselor, and they kind of look at your grades, and you know, here, you know, I was a good student, of course, and did very well on the test, and had a great set of opportunities. And it was interesting, I got a call my junior year from Cornell, and they said, hey, listen, we have this, it was called a Minority Introduction to Engineering program, where we're, you know, out we're finding kids with high, I think it was what they called in the not the LSATs, what were they called? The
SATs.
Yeah, it wasn't SATs before that, it was I forgot, it was the pre-one, the PSAT, that's what it was.
Okay.
The PSAT, people with high PSAT scores, and, you know, bring them in, just give them exposure to engineering. And wow, and all of a sudden I show up, and you go for a week, or I think it was 2 weeks, whatever it was, and all of a sudden you're meeting a bunch of African-American, Latino kids from all over the U.S., and you're learning things and just sampling. And I said, I mean, where would you get that, right? And you wouldn't get that at my high school for sure, but what that did was expand the knowledge set of what opportunities were. You know, here's what electrical engineering was, here's chemical engineering, all that sort of things. So I ended up just going to Cornell, one of the reasons because of that affinity for that program, got offers and places to you know, Naval Academy or Stanford and a bunch, but I didn't even go visit Stanford because how could it be better than Cornell? Right? And there was no college visits or anything of that sort. But that's, again, the importance of exposing children to the opportunities that are out there and the possibilities. You know, there was one guy who was my dad's friend who was an engineer, and that's the only engineer that I ever met up until, you know, high school, right? So everyone in ours was a teacher, or, you know, maybe, you know, was a teacher and then worked in real estate. And of course, you know, we had the lieutenant governor, but, you know, he was really a teacher at the end of the day, right, who decided to go into politics. Right. So that was a limited set of experiences that we had.
And did you go straight to Wall Street after college?
No, I worked for about 6 years in applied research and development. You know, one of the joys of being a chemical engineer is, and we talked about becoming the modern day alchemist. You learn how to create things, you know, transform matter from one form to another. And that's what was important to me. I wanted to be an inventor, and so I worked for about 6 years in applied research and development. Got a chance to, you know, travel all over the world with big companies like, you know, Kraft Journal Foods and Air Products and Chemicals, solving some very complex problems, and with using, you know, my engineering skill set. And I loved it, absolutely loved it, until one day I was sitting there with the head of my division and the head of marketing, the head of sales, head of development for, you know, it's a small division, but then, you know, Philip Morris, because it's part of Kraft. And I realized when we went through our 6 most important strategic priorities, I was leading 5 of them. I was half the age of everybody in the room, and I know I was making a third of everybody in the room. And I said, I'm either doing something very right or very wrong. And it was a bit of both, right? And so this kind of that lesson of the realization of worth and self-worth, right? I said, you know what, this is a great experience. I'm having fun. I got 3 promotions in like 18 months because I was doing all these great and wonderful things. But then I realized there's probably something else out there. And that's when I decided to apply for school. And I got to the JD MBA program at Columbia, and decided after the summer with some lawyers at Philip Morris, decided just to do the MBA. And that's when I went to Columbia. When I finished my MBA, that's when I went on to Wall Street. So that's, you know, the interesting part of that was my first year I did well as a top student in my first year, so I had to come back for summer graduation and get this award. And this is the importance of people and access, again, and mentorship. There's a guy by the name of John Newton-Dahl, who is now, you know, he's vice chairman of Deutsche Bank, African-American, grew up and, you know, had his own private equity, his own securities firm at the time. And he was a keynote speaker. And so after they did my introduction, I get my award, and I'm kind of heading home. He calls me over, he says, hey, you know, you have a really interesting background. Have you ever thought about a career in investment banking? And I said, well, there's a bunch of investment bankers in my class, and I don't like any of them. And he says, well, why not? I said, because they think they know everything. They're pretty arrogant. I said, you got to understand, I'm an engineer. We do know everything. It bothers us. And I said, in all honesty, I don't know what they really do to create value. These guys talk about roads. I didn't, you know, how would I know what an investment banker did? You know, I grew up in Denver, Colorado, you know, son of school teachers. And now I'm in the world of technology. I'm like, what is it you people do? And then he told me what they did and how much money they made. I said, oh my God, you got to be kidding. I thought I was making $42,000 a year, man. I mean, how can you make any more than that, right? And John, he says, hey, come on down. I sit down when we have lunch, all this sort of stuff. We have a great time. and he's one of my closest friends now. He picks up the phone and calls 6 people. Now, I didn't realize at the time, Stan O'Neill, who became the chairman and CEO of Merrill Lynch, okay, 2 partners of Goldman Sachs, a guy who's now the vice chair at Citibank, okay, and 2 people at Morgan Stanley. I had no idea who these people were. He said, I got this interesting, funny guy here. You should talk to him. And being a scientist, I then went and literally talked to over 100 people on Wall Street. Because the good news about going to Columbia is in the city of New York, you can just get on a train and go down there, right? So anyway, I meet with all these folks, and I realize, equity trading and equity, what is this stuff you people do, right? And, mortgage-backed security, what is this? And the only business I liked was mergers and acquisitions. Because with the exception of warfare, and now divorce, that's how assets are transferred on this planet, right? And I said, that's a very interesting business. It's a strategic conversation. It's a board-level conversation. It's a CEO-level conversation. And I said, now that's something that seems interesting to me. And this gets back to that mentorship thing. You don't learn that business in school. You have to learn it from someone who is a practitioner of that craft.
Right.
And when you go to any of those firms, almost every one of them, whoever that main M&A male partner was, because it was a male white partner, was surrounded by 6 other people who've been with them 3, 4, 5 years. So how's a person like me going to go into that environment and first get any deals that are worth working on? And then there's a systemic underdevelopment of people in that business, which is a whole other conversation we should talk about another day, if you don't think about it right. But I went to Goldman Sachs because they're the only ones who actually had a teamwork culture, where you worked on a different deal with every single partner. I said, okay, now that makes sense. Because it's a fact pattern-based business. You learn this business by working with someone who has done it and aggregating those fact patterns of experiences, and that's how you get good. And then I moved out to the left coast because I said, you know what? It was open running field, and nobody was thinking about technology at the time.
So just so folks know, if Vista portfolio companies were brought together, Vista would be the 6th largest software company in the world. Just so you know that. So you've already talked about, I think you've alluded to mentorship, but so you've gotten a broad spectrum of your experiences. What do you think the accelerators to success are, particularly in environments where structures are not designed to help people succeed?
Sure. This is complex. There's an education piece, then there's a knowledge piece, and then there's a practitioner of a craft piece that all are important. And you do need to have guides along the way, at least if you're a person of color, okay? And I say that because, being a person of color, I see the difference in my experiences versus others, in what their experiences have been. And I wouldn't say that it is, who knows, it's overt or not. I just can tell you what my experience has been. So, first of all, you have to do well enough. No, actually not. You have to be, have a desire to be great at what it is you want to do. First of all, to do this business. That's the first thing. And there's a fundamental base level of understanding of, basic math. You have to be good at it, okay? Really good at it. And then from there, you have to understand and start to listen to the structures around how deals are done. And there's a whole fact pattern capturing that's important, that while you can listen, the only way to really learn it is to do it. And you have to become expert. And there are talks about, what is an expert? Well, an expert is someone who dedicates 10,000 hours to their craft. Okay? That's a lot of time. Not over 20 years, but in as compressed a period of time as possible. The advantage of going to these investment banks is in a heady environment, that happens, in 100-hour work weeks. Right? And, while all your friends who you graduate college with are going out on Friday night and Saturday night, guess what? You're working. And on Saturday, you're working, and on Saturday, you are working. But that's how you build, that fabric. And to be an expert at your craft. You cannot do this business well if you are not an expert at your craft. So all of those things, first of all, you have to have structures and opportunity to see it. Then you have to dedicate yourself to it. And then you have to have people who can help you understand and navigate to some extent, you know, why certain deals went one way and why certain deals went the other way. And it is highly nuanced. It isn't something that you can just read in a case study. You have to live it, and you have to live it through the eyes of someone who has lived it. And to the extent you see people who have lived it and you're in that environment, you have to now seek out the time and force that engagement of why it went one way versus another, and see how that fits in the context of, you know, of the deal business. So those are, I mean, it's complex, and it is, but the rewards, beyond the personal rewards, but you know, the rewards are just astounding. Okay, in terms of personal growth, personal development, and frankly, the opportunity to then train and build others so that they can become experts in their craft and realize their dreams, right? So I think, you know, that's the arc of the opportunity there that is in this world. I mean, there's a rarefied air of people who are really good at this and who really get an opportunity to do it and practice it at a size and scale that matters. And then you have the opportunity to plow what I call the fruits of those resources back into the communities that you care about.
Right. So actually, that's a good segue. You notice he didn't mention financial reward.
I did.
But the fact of the matter is that he's done very well. And so I'd love for you to share more about your philanthropic endeavors. What are your priorities?
Sure. The high level is I like to look for what I call gaps in opportunity and try to fill those gaps where you can, right? And I've been doing this, I call it all my life. You know, I always laughed, you know, I always look for what I call the B student who could be an A student if they're not working 25 hours a week, right? And how do you help them? And to some extent, that working 25 hours a week is a good thing, right? But to some extent, them not having time enough to do their homework is not necessarily a good thing, right? So it's finding those kind of opportunities to help. And I've always been that way, and so now I can actually do it at scale in different ways. So one of the things when we turn 10, and we do a whole lot of philanthropic work, you know, we write checks and spend time and build stuff, but I said, you know what? The most important thing, that's what it gets back to mind, the most important thing we actually have is intellectual property, okay? We have a know-how of how you actually transform businesses. So I said, we're not going to just write checks. We're going to go adopt 3 inner city companies in the cities in which we operate, Chicago, Austin, and San Francisco. And what I'm going to do is go get TWIGO fellows, and there's, you know, the Bobbins and TWIGO Foundation, they usually look for African Americans, Latinos, and train them. And they go, you know, help them with mentors, all that sort of stuff. So we're going to get some of those and train, and I'm going to hire them. And I'm going to pay for them. And train them in the Vista way, the way we do our transformation activities in our companies. And then we're going to adopt an urban core company and put them in that company. Okay? We're not going to buy the company, but we're going to bring this intellectual property into that company and help transform it. So our first one is think about this. It is a specialty chemicals manufacturer on the south side of Chicago run and owned by an African-American woman. And we put our TWIGO fellows in there. Now, over this four-year period of time, we have quadrupled her EBITDA, her profits, and increased her sales by 20-something%, and actually put a business infrastructure in place that she can now grow profitably. And she's expanded, of course, and she said, well, you know, because, of course, I'm like, well, what do you want? I don't want anything. I want you to pay it forward. So now she's expanded her Women in Science program from 10 girls to now I think she handles over 1,000. Okay? That's the sort of thing. Take those profits, plow them in that way, can expand and hire more people on the south side of Chicago into a stable business that she owns, all of.
And you have no equity stake
No.
in, wow.
Okay?
That's awesome.
But, thanks. You know, to me, that's the greatest reward because you think about, remember those gaps? And I know you guys are talking about gaps in inequality and gaps in wealth. Well, it's gaps, and it truly is knowledge. It's not necessarily education, even though there are some educational, it's a knowledge gap. And, you know, providing the knowledge and the know-how is an important dynamic that I think, you know, we continue to do at Vista, and I like to do within Vista, and I'd like to continue to expand that opportunity set because, you know, she wouldn't have any, you know, it's this classic thing. So you spend some time in this company, and she's paying, you know, a higher utility rate than a company right down the street. I mean, it's that sort of stuff.
Right.
Well, she wouldn't necessarily know that until, we have people go in and help her and write the right sort of contracts and get the right sort. That's simple stuff, not just, supply chain management, put the supply chain system, all that sort of stuff, which makes big impact. But it's those things that if you don't do it well, you never have the economic wherewithal to invest in your business. Mm-hmm. You see what I mean? And where would she actually have time to either learn it, focus on it, and do it, right?
Right.
So,
I mean, with that, you just got back from London. Thank you for joining us, by
Sure.
the way. He just got off the plane, you all.
Yeah.
You work in Silicon Valley. You travel around the world. How many people of color do you see in these key positions?
Outside of Vista companies?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you. Very few. Mm-hmm. But part of, again, and I realize, my job is to also provide leadership in that regard. So, what I've been doing with a group of folks who look like me in my business, we've now formed an organization to help each other, right? To deal with things like fundraising and how you scale an organization. We get together, and we just it's folks, private equity, folks who are African American and Latino, and we sit and we talk about, well, here's how you deal with that particular pension fund manager, and they've got these little proclivities, and here's how you actually think about how you scale, and here's how you think about building a back office operation. And actually having those shared experiences so that they can now grow. And I think our assets, if you look at our group in particular, I think we've got some of the highest returns of any in private equity, and I just always laugh and look at the LPs that we don't have, the limited partners, or the investors that we don't have versus those who have horrible returns, who don't look like us, who those LPs continually re-up. Right? In hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, right? And our folks are scrapping at it 30 and 40, 50 million at a time to get there, right? And so you continue to see that disparity. But like all things, look, you just got to work at it every day. And so part of what our job is, and I tell them, my job is to make sure that there's going to be 15 more Robert Smiths in the next 10 years, and in the next 20 years, 150 more. You see what I mean? Because that's what makes a difference ultimately, because when, you think about, controlling the 6th, 7th largest software company on the planet. Okay, I've got over 30-something thousand employees. Now, when all these folks get into, now you actually have economic power, okay, in a way that can be used to solve some problems. Look, we relocate businesses all the time. You got this, these riots going on in Baltimore. Part of the big riot opportunity, I think, is just lack of opportunity for some. Frankly, a breakdown of trust, which is a whole nother set of conversations I know people are talking about. Now people are doing something about it. But if you bring these sort of opportunities into those sort of communities, frankly, every community, Ferguson, you name it, right? Then the hope comes, the optimism comes, and then, America can be what it is, right? So, but unless you are able to have influence over assets and businesses and enterprises, then you're not really participating in a lot of what the American economy actually is. Because you can solve some of these problems just by providing an opportunity for jobs.
So I'm going to open up the floor to questions. There are 2 microphones on either side. But my last question for you, before we take a few questions from the audience, is this is why we're here, asset building. This is the reason for this conference. Particularly for vulnerable populations, and a way to build wealth for families to have economic security over a lifetime. So, what does our nation need to do to expand asset building opportunities and build, frankly, a society that's diverse, inclusive, and fair for all?
Yeah. Part of what we have to do is hold those institutions accountable for their actions. I look at some of the largest pension funds in the United States, some of which aren't investors with Vista. We got named top private equity fund on the planet for the decade 2000 to 2009. But yet, I don't have assets from some of the top 5 or 6 pension funds in the United States where I know the majority of their pensioners are African American, Latino, inner city. You see what I mean? Because there's the firemen and the workers and teachers. You got to hold those institutions accountable, okay? And say, listen, you need to put the money in the hands that represent the people who are actually paying the $62 a week. Okay, so part of it's that, right? And it isn't as if there's this group of managers who aren't, like guys like John Rodgers and others, they've been at this 30 years.
Yeah, Eddie Brown.
Spectacular returns. But yet their capital base is a fraction of what others are whose returns aren't anywhere near as good, right? So, you got to hold those, I know you got policymakers here and think tank folks, you got to hold people accountable because it's that sort of thing that when people find out about it, you say, that's just not right. There's a whole bunch of things that just aren't right, but, people have to voice that and say, that's just not right. And we got to do something about it. You can't leave it to those managers to do something about it because all of a sudden they can get blackballed. Now they can't, right? So
actually, we're the this just ain't right crowd.
Right. Good.
That's us.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like we actually have any. You must have answered every question. Oh, there's one question in the back, and actually, that's all the time we have is for one question. There are two questions.
Oh, there are two people. So
we'll go ahead. We'll
I'll
take two
answer
of them.
quickly.
And I thought you were going to ask a question on R&D. Okay, go ahead, ma'am.
Well, I want to ask more of a personal question. I'm a financial leadership coach, so we try to help African Americans, bridge this wealth gap. But it doesn't seem like they're interested in trying to make their lives better. So how do you help them? I know you're doing it from the equity standpoint for businesses, but how do you get the individual people to realize that they can be wealthy too? I mean, I can't, when I do financial analysis for these individual clients, and I'm doing it on a complimentary basis, I'm not charging them, but they don't seem to get it.
I get you. I understand. This is one, I cannot answer that question, but I'll give you a perspective on it. Every black person I know absolutely wants to be wealthier.
Me too.
Okay? Not everyone wants to make the sacrifice and the trade-off to become wealthier. And the first part of that trade-off is savings and investment and time. How do you spend your time? I'm not in the advice-giving business, but if I were in an advice-giving business, you have to find 2 or 3 or 5 who are willing to make those investments, and you have to show them as examples, okay? And make sure it gets, publicized in a way that people say, oh, that's just like me. I make, $38,000 a year. I make $42,000. I make $58,000. And here's the sacrifices, the money I put away, the investments I made, and here's the difference 8 years later, 9 years later, and 10 years later. The good news is we do follow people who look like us often if the story is told the right way. And the good news is we've got these little devices that you can tell 1 billion people your story in a matter of minutes, right? So be thoughtful and creative in that regard as to how you tell that story.
Question.
Yes, I first want to congratulate you on your success and say if you don't have a biography, you should write one, because I'm sure it'll be a bestseller.
Well, Reggie Lewis wrote this book called Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun?
No,
I'm writing one called They Shouldn't. So.
Quick question. You talked about mentors, and we all know that the mentor is a person that guides your professional development. But what I'd like you to talk about for just a moment is a sponsor. And that, of course, is a person that will leverage some of their capital in a company to give you access to the people who make the decisions to get you the leverage to get into a company to become, if you will, a stockbroker. So could you talk about the significance of not just having a mentor in your life, but also a sponsor?
Sure, and it's critical to have that. My experience has been the sponsors of Robert Smith's career only did so after I demonstrated that I'm willing to make the commitment to my career. It's a two-way street. It's not just, oh, here's, the person you're going to sponsor, make sure that they get on good deals. No, it is, they see you in the office, you're grinding 100 hours, you're getting it done, you're making sure there's no mistakes, and if there is a mistake, you correct it. You're following up, you're reaching outside of your knowledge to go learn more. When you do that, sponsors are more than happy to then take credit for you. Okay, and that has been my experience, but it has all come through. You gotta demonstrate that that's who you are and that's your priority. If it's Friday night and it's 5 o'clock, your sponsor seeing you leaving because you got happy hour with your boys. Well, guess what? I mean, and they're there. You got to be conscious of that sort of stuff. Okay, I like when they come back in on Saturday because they did come back in. I'm wearing the same thing I wore Friday night, right? Okay, this guy's dedicated to his craft. And so when this deal happens, they're happy to stand up in front of the managing principal of the firm at that time to say, hey, you know, Robert did this work. You see what I mean? So it's a two-way street. And sponsors, you know, again, I have the opportunity, and I do in my firm, and build and develop people. But we have, when we do our reviews, part of what we're looking at, do you have that kind of grit? Are you dedicated to this? This is not a lifestyle business. And if you want to make it a lifestyle business, this is the wrong business to be in. Okay? So that's, in the world I live in, that's something we think about and we talk about in that context. That's just the nature of it. So we look for, you know, again, I will sponsor those, and even my folks now who have not grown up with me in this business, I sponsored them because I saw them putting that level of effort and energy in 15 years ago, and guess what? They still do it today.
So I take it there's no work-life balance at Vista.
Oh, there's plenty of work-life balance. Your work is your life, and we're balanced.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Mr. Smith. My name is Darrell Hamm with the Emerging Technology Consortium. We know the government spends about $140 billion a year on basic R&D, and that most of that money goes to the same schools. Do you believe that if we had a more equitable distribution of R&D dollars, that in fact it could be a source for closing the wealth gap?
Yeah, the first thing is it shouldn't be 140 billion. It should be like 500 billion, okay, if not a trillion. You guys got to realize America only has a few exports, and they're all intellectual property based, period, okay? And, you know, I think the important part is you have to get it into the hands and into the minds of people who are going to transform, you know, who can transform businesses, economies, and basically that basic research leading to opportunity sets. Listen, we are all sitting here leveraging today things that were done for the NASA project, okay? You know, I had a good chance of getting one of my first jobs at this little company called Bell Labs, right? And I saw some of the stuff that we're working on 30 years ago, okay, that you guys are using day to day. That sort of stuff is essential. And, you know, again, I don't know how that 140 billion is distributed, but I can guarantee you there's a whole lot of smart folks out here, okay, who are Americans, who can use some portion of that to make something new and something different. And just based on the basic math, the demographics, a lot more of them are going to look a lot more like me than what they looked like 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So, you know, I think there should be a, I don't, you know, equitable distribution, I don't know, but should be a broad distribution, because you never know where the next great idea is coming.
So with that, let's thank Robert Smith.